The sounds of shackles jangling, keys jingling, and guards whistling filled the hull of the ship. Prisoners quietly chatted among themselves, looked out the portholes to freedom, and daydreamed. Anything to get them as far from here as possible. Prison was bad enough, let alone in these conditions. Welcome to Fast Facts Friday. My name is Eleanor. Just a quick disclaimer for a younger audience before we dive in. This story may be disturbing to some, so viewer discretion is advised. Okay everyone, let's get into it. This week on Shipwreck Sunday, the ship we cover takes a dramatic turn from war hero to horrendous prison ship. So, let's look at prison ships and where they came from. A prison ship, by definition, is a current or former seagoing vessel that has been modified to become a place of detention for convicts, prisoners of war, or civilian internees. Some prison ships were hulked or left on shore. Though many nations have deployed prison ships over time, the practice was most widespread in 18th and 19th century Britain as the government sought to address the issues of overcrowded civilian jails on land and an influx of enemy detainees from the War of Jenkins' Ear, the 7 Years' War, and the French Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars. The first hulk prison ship came into use on July 15, 1776, under command of Mr. Duncan Campbell, and it was moored at Barking Creek with prisoners doing hard labor on the shore during daylight hours. The vessels were a common form of internment in Britain and everywhere else during this time period, and let's start by looking at their use during the American Revolutionary War. During the American Revolutionary War, the British used a system of prison ships to imprison American POWs. Many of these ships were moored in Wallabout Bay near New York City, which was a major British stronghold at the time. Due to overcrowding, the poor quality of the ships, mistreatment from guards, and terrible rations, conditions on these ships were abysmal. Disease would sweep through these ships in waves, which combined with starvation killed an estimated 12,000 American POWs. Prison ships were also used during the Napoleonic Wars and hulks at Chatham, Portsmouth, and Plymouth, though conditions are debatable since it was shown that living conditions on board and the mortality amongst prisoners were misrepresented by the French for propaganda purposes during the wars and by individual prisoners who had wrote their memoirs after and exaggerated the sufferings they underwent. Some accounts are almost completely fictional and contain lengthy, plagiarized passages, and unfortunately, some reputable historians took such memoirs at their face value and didn't investigate their origins. Unfortunately, this means that there has been a myth perpetuated that these ships were used for the extermination of prisoners and the conditions on board were intolerable. Not saying it was the Ritz, but it certainly wasn't as horrendous as described. The truth seems to be a lot less dreary, and when we really investigate the death rates of prisoners, it was between 5 and 8% of all prisoners. Still, not great, but not nearly as bad as these unreliable memoirs describe. Prison ships were used extensively throughout history. And we'll continue to look into that. If you are enjoying this episode and want to hear more about ships, their careers, and the wrecks, check out our main show, Shipwreck Sunday, every Sunday night at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Alright, let's look at Australia next. Australia saw the usage of prison ships in New South Wales, South Australia, and Western Australia, as well as other colonies of Australia. In New South Wales, prison hulks were even used as juvenile detention centres. In 1813, a tender document was advertised in the Australian newspaper for the supply of bread to prisoners aboard a prison hulk in Sydney Harbour. Speaking of Sydney Harbour, the Phoenix served as a prison hulk there between 1824 and 1837. She held convicts awaiting transportation to Norfolk Island and Moreton Bay. One source claims she was the first prison hulk in Australia, but this can't be 100% verified. Vernon and Sabron, the latter being officially a nautical school ship, were anchored in Sydney Harbour too. The commander of the two ships, Frederick Knightenstein, introduced a system of, quote, discipline, surveillance, physical drill, and a system of grading and marks. He aimed at creating a moral earthquake in each new boy. Every new admission was placed in the lowest grade and, through hard work and obedience, gradually won a restricted number of privileges. There are a few other examples, but you get the picture. When we look at World War I, cruise liners in Portsmouth Harbour were used to hold detained prisoners during the beginning of the war. However, this is nothing compared to the Russian Civil War, which had prison ships given the lovely nickname of death barges. Death barges were floating prisons used by both sides during the Russian Civil War in 1918 through 1919, primarily in the Volga Basin. They were mainly used to keep potential political enemies imprisoned rather than as execution facilities despite their gruesome nickname. In case of a quickly advancing hostile army, they could be quickly dragged away or sunk in a fairway, thus both liquidating enemy sympathizers and hampering the enemy navy's navigation. The first usage of death barges was recorded in Yaroslav during the Left SR uprising in 1918. It is also known that one death barge with Soviet sympathizers was hijacked by towboat under Fyodor Raskolnikov. The horrors and atrocities of Nazi Germany on land were bad enough, let alone the atrocities on prison ships at sea. Nazi Germany assembled a small fleet of ships in the Bay of Lübeck to hold concentration camp prisoners. They included the ocean liners Cap Arcona and Deutschland, as well as the vessels Thielbeck and Athen. Unfortunately, the RAF didn't realize innocent concentration camp victims were on board these vessels, unfairly imprisoned and kept separate from life-saving equipment like life preservers and lifeboats. So, they attacked the Bay of Lübeck fleet on May 3, 1945, leading to the massacre of at least 7,400 concentration camp victims. Most of the inmates were either killed by bombing or strafing, burned alive, drowned while trying to reach the shore, or were murdered by SS guards. Rest in peace to these poor innocent souls, having faced the concentration camps only to die in one of the worst possible ways imaginable. After World War II, prison ships were still used in multiple occasions, including by the United States. In the US, the Vernon C. Bain Correctional Center was a prison barge operated by the New York City Department of Corrections as an adjunct to Rikers Island, opened in 1992. However, it was built for this purpose rather than repurposed, and it was the largest operational prison ship facility in the United States during its operation. In June of 2008, The Guardian printed claims by Reprieve that U.S. forces are holding people arrested in the global war on terrorism on active naval warships, including the USS Bataan and Peleliu, although this was denied by the U.S. Navy. They did end up admitting to it in 2011 to hold terrorist suspects on ships at sea, claiming legal authority to do so. The Libyan national Abu Anas al-Libi was imprisoned in the USS San Antonio for the 1998 United States Embassy bombings. In 2009, the U.S. Navy converted the main deck aboard the supply ship USNS Lewis and Clark into a brig to hold pirates captured off the coast of Somalia until they could be transferred to Kenya for prosecution. The brig was capable of holding up to 26 prisoners and was operated by a detachment of Marines from the 26th Marine Expeditionary Unit. The light cruiser took on heavy damage, smoke billowing off of her. One could only hold their breath and hope she'd survive this intense firefight, though despite this damage, she remained fighting to what could be the end. No one suspected a ship named after the capital of a state known for their potatoes would put up such a fight. And this week on Shipwreck Sunday, we get into the story of USS Boise.